a number of people look at these murals and feel that given their content and particularly the violence depicted in them, that they are not appropriate for a church. The murals say something about the fact that the church is more than just the European influence that's reflected in the architectural design. The murals say something about the fact that for the last number of generations, this church has served a community that has roots that come from a place other than Europe.
Well, the murals are quite exciting, and they've also been very controversial. They were brought about after my husband had a meeting with members of the church, and the members of the church decided, yes, we would love to have murals, and they selected the various scriptures that would be attached to each of the murals, and the artists were given the freedom to interpret those words as they saw fit and as they were so moved. And I do say moved because once they started painting, they became a part of the art itself and a part of the building itself. They would very often stay until the wee hours of the morning and sometimes even sleep there in the church. And as I said, they're very controversial. I had a man of the cloth to say to me, well, Chris, what do you think about it? They're kind of harsh, wouldn't you say? And I said, yup, but what is more harsh or brutal than the crucifix, which we look at every Sunday?
Under the leadership of the Reverend Paul Washington, my predecessor, the Church of the Advocate really lived into its name, Advocate. In 1968, the National Black Power Conference met here. In 1970, the Black Panthers had their national convention here. The first women in the Episcopal Church were ordained here in 1974. I think all of those indicate the extent to which the church was deeply involved in issues of justice. This is an African-American community that we serve in the middle of a hard-pressed community in the city of Philadelphia. Yet the reality of it is when those 11 women were ordained in 1974, none of them were from this community. None of them were African American. Probably all of them enjoyed some of the affluence that Episcopal clergy tend to enjoy. I think it's a recognition of the fact that injustice suffered by anyone is injustice, that we all suffer injustice anywhere, any place, is something that we have to struggle to speak to.
Father Washington was looking to have some murals painted in his sanctuary. So subsequent meetings and fundraising by the members of the church and a lot of labor expertise, the murals were erected and subsequently they're still there. For me, it's kind of like an unfinished project because I had thoughts of painting up higher in the sanctuary, but the murals caused a lot of controversy, so it was put on hold. But that's 30 years ago.
There were people on one side who sided with Father Washington very vehemently. There were people who decided they would leave the church if this were allowed to continue. They were not debating the fact that this was part of our history. It's just that the information was too stark for them. But we prevailed.
The Advocate was incredibly active in opposition to the war in Vietnam, incredibly active in the anti-apartheid movement. I think it's a testimony to Father Washington's ministry. The same kind of tradition and legacy in the black church that goes back to Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, the earliest abolitionists, and an effort to keep that legacy alive in these times.
Reverend Washington was one of the remarkable people that I ever knew. He was, in my estimation, one of the giants that existed in the 20th century, and on the same level as a Winston Churchill or a Tom Dooley or a Pope John. He was a man of tremendous faith who had compassion for people, all sorts of people, and willing to take risks, recognizing that sometimes the Holy Spirit works outside the box. And he did that in the midst of a very racist society, a city that was extremely racist at the time. And I think that anyone who met him, who dealt with him, even if they disagreed with him, came away respecting this man of God. Because he lived what he proclaimed. And he did that up to his dying day.
He's one of the most magnificent people I have ever met in my life. Sincerely, in a capsule, I would say he's a modern saint.
Everybody that other people tossed to the side, that was his congregation, and that was his flock. You had the gay and lesbian community, you had the homeless, you had the people that were unemployed, and all those people in that realm, he just welcomed them into the church. Black Power conferences and the Black Panther conference was really a great thing to have, and Philadelphia just seemed like the right place to have it. And quite frankly, I don't know if they could have had it any other place. I know the Black Panther conference, nobody wanted to have them, so they asked my dad, and he said, "Sure, come on in, we can do that." There was FBI. I remember the FBI used to sit right outside the house, and my dad would get out and walk to the church. They would follow him to the church. When he came out to church, they would follow him back home. It's only a few yards, but I guess they did that for intimidation. There were FBI files on my dad, and eventually he got a hold of some of those FBI files through the Freedom of Information Act. He had plenty of hate mail, and that's one of the things that he protected us from. He never showed us the hate mail, but after he passed away, going through some of his belongings, we saw all kinds of hate mail that was sent to him. And just, we saw how ugly people really are, how ugly racism is in this country.
I want you to see what I worked from when I painted the mural. As Joseph was sold into bondage by his brothers, everyone's popular painting. Everyone seems to like this one. As Moses was leading his people from bondage, so was Frederick Douglass. One painting I called Mr. Liberty. It looks like a demon now in the painting in the sanctuary, but when I painted the model, he had on a police helmet and a star in it, and also the mural called Segregation, remembering what happened through the 60s, Bull Connors and the Dogs. I'll also put a policeman in that painting. And Father Washington had a good relationship with the police, and he thought it was too controversial to put in the painting. He would come down and talk to me, and subsequently I turned the policeman into a demon figure rather than a policeman. Congregation members thought it was not apropos for a sanctuary. But looking at the stained glass windows in the church, for me, is there was violence in the stained glass windows. There was soldiers and spears and all, everything else. So I thought this was all like part of the ambiance of the church. And I'd always been influenced by Mexican mural painters, and their thing was struggling and suffering and overcoming. I'll take out segregation too. Ah, no good. Paint coming off on plastic. The activities of Bull Connor, and of course the racism of the South. I thought of welfare as being another form of slavery. It keeps you in the dark, sort of always begging with your palms up. Segregation is separating you from what is on the right side, which is work, education, and knowledge. I knew this photographer at the time, and he would go to these scenes of riot all across the country. America was really in a revolution. And some of the things he witnessed, which never would appear on the evening news at all at that time, were things like tanks with going through these communities with 50 caliber machine guns. And this friend of mine, one day he came back from one of his excursions in a body cast because the National Guard had just caught him and just beat him all up so badly. So I had all these things in my mind, and this is the late 60s, so when it came time to do this project at the Advocate, these things all sort of came to my consciousness during the course of me working on these murals. I kept the biblical theme for most of it, but when it got around to the finality of the murals, I got more involved with contemporary history more so than biblical history.